Well, hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Wild Your Garden. And in today's video I'm going to be talking to you guys about the top 5 non-native herbaceous perennials that you can put in your garden to attract wildlife. Now, before I get started, I probably ought to explain a little bit about non-native versus native. Now, obviously the whole ethos behind this channel is attracting wildlife to your garden, and the bulk of it, I probably would say, is about using native wildflowers, native species that are indigenous to your area. So that's whether you're in the States, India, Australia, Northern Europe, wherever you may be. It's trying to use as many of those wildflowers as possible to attract wildlife, because that's the flora that a lot of your wildlife is going to be used to nectaring on, to getting food, so getting food from, to laying its eggs on. So that's all the caterpillars, the larvae, and of course the birds will be looking for these types of wildflowers and shrubs in which they can collect these caterpillars to feed their chicks and everything like that. So where possible, and certainly on a landscape scale setting, I would always say to plant native indigenous species to wherever you are around the world. Now, when it comes to a garden setting, I think we can bend the rules a little bit, and that's why I'd like to try to introduce you guys to a few of the non-native herbaceous perennials that we find in our gardens, which just absolutely add the icing on the cake, if you like, because a normal wildlife garden has a common misperception that it should be how should I say, or it's likely to look scruffy. Now, I want to kind of do away with this idea, and although some of the best habitats in wildlife can look a little bit scruffy, brambles, nettles, thistles, all of which are apparently going to be used in the RHS, some of the RHS show gardens this year at the RHS Chelsea flower show, which is in a few weeks' time, which is great, but I think we run the risk of going a little bit too far the other way and actually putting off a lot of traditional gardeners. Now, for those of you that are out there that are new to the channel, that have just discovered all the videos that I've produced over the last 3 years here on YouTube, then you will have seen some of the stuff that I've been doing, which is mostly focusing on the natives. But the non-natives can be just as attractive to the wildlife, and I'd like to try and encourage a few of those more traditional gardeners away from the striped lawns and the standard roses and some of the perfect gardens that we see in magazines and catalogues, and try and entice you into a slightly different approach which will make your garden just as beautiful in my eyes, but also far more beneficial for wildlife. So with that said, let's now have a look at some of the best herbaceous perennials that you can put in your garden to attract wildlife. I should say I'm back in my own garden, guys, so yeah, hopefully there's going to be a lot more videos to come of this back garden of mine and the front garden. And obviously, if you haven't seen any of the videos I've done on the channel previously, then go to the home page, click on playlist and look for my garden. If you go in there, there's a whole host of videos on the front garden, the back garden, some of the garden tours I've done, particularly in the back garden before, but also I've just finished renovating the front garden. Well, almost. In fact, today I've been out and bought a lot of plants to go in the front garden to finish that off. So the 2 herbaceous borders and the border on top, or the raised border on top of the insect hotel, I'm going to get those planted over the next day or two. So stay tuned, more videos to come on the front garden and all the plants that are going into that. But some of the plants that are going into those herbaceous borders are going to be some of these. Now, if I start with number 1, which is a Nepeta. Now, Nepeta is you might know it as catmint. It's a really nice plant, and again, it's one that is very, very good for wildlife. Now, in particular, bees absolutely adore Nepeta. Now, it has a very, very good advantage as a plant because it will flower. It's almost double flowered, so even if you don't cut it, it will produce a second flush. It'll flower, you know, around about sort of May time into June, and then it'll flower again also often into August time as well, where it will be another great source of nectar and pollen for a lot of other insects. So it's really, really good. There's many varieties that you can buy, and one of the ones that I've often recommended is the 6 Hills Giant, which does get pretty big, so you need a bit of space for that one. This one is actually a Kit Kat, it's Nepeta Kit Kat, which I absolutely love the name of, and it really creates a fabulous profusion of purple flowers in, like I say, sort of end of May time and in towards June. Doesn't look like much at the moment, but really, really good plant for bees. And the best thing is you could chop this thing back, you could run over it with a lawnmower and it will grow back and flower almost continuously. So it's a really, really good plant. Behind me I've actually got one in a pot that I've got to plant in my border just here, which is actually a Six Hills Giant, and I love that because in a setting where it is in these raised beds, it will just kind of sprawl over the edge and just sort of come back up and create this lovely block of nectar for the bees and other insects to nectar on. It's also good for butterflies as well. Butterflies such as the peacock, small tortoiseshell, a lot of the white species will also nectar on it, so a really good nectar source for them as well, and a whole list of moths as well, so it's really good. If you can get it in a sunny spot, and I should say guys, with most of these perennials, they will prefer to have more sun than less, so if you can get them on a south or west facing aspect, and they will do very well indeed. Most of them that I'm speaking about today as well will prefer well drained, moist but well drained soils as well, but there's a couple of species with exceptions that we will come on to shortly. So number one is Nepeta Kit Kat or Six Hills Giant, depending on how much space you've got. Highly recommend this plant. So number two is good old faithful. What English cottage garden would be complete without some beautiful lavender? Now this is a lavender angustifolia, which is the kind of traditional Mediterranean lavender. Obviously this is what's often known as English lavender, but it originates from the Mediterranean, where it is absolutely a vital food source for many insects, as it can be in your gardens in the UK and in the States as well, and in that northern hemisphere it does grow very well in warmer climates. Depending on what zone you are in the States, it will do better if you are, you know, kind of less likely to get a lot of frosts in the winter time. So and a well drained soil as well is absolutely vital for all lavenders, doesn't matter what species they are. They do prefer moist but well drained soils. They won't go very well in clay, and I would say guys, do not water them. You could almost neglect them. When I say do not water them, I was going to say do not water them too much, because they don't like to have saturated feet. They like to be able to get their roots into kind of drier soils, and they will do better with almost a bit of neglect. So a great plant for a south facing very hot sunny spot. Certainly obviously in France, in sort of Provence, in the southern regions of France, I have seen fields and fields of lavender when I visited last summer, which is just a delight to see. And lavender is so good, of course, because it is just a lovely compact absolute profusion of colour and a source of nectar and pollen for a lot of insects. Now what I would say about the lavender is the best time to prune it when you've got it in your garden is after it's flowered. So when the seed heads are finished is the best time, because otherwise it can, and I've been guilty of it myself, it can sort of grow and become very leggy in the middle, and there's really sort of thick wooden stems, and then when you try and cut it back hard, the older it is, the less likely it is to take to that kind of a brutal hacking back, if you like. So little and often is better with lavender. So after it's flowered, and you can see there's an absolute profusion of little buds that are coming up. So some are just about, there's one just flowering there. This is quite early actually. I was surprised to see this in flower in the garden centre today, but it is a little bit early. But normally they will be sort of out in May, June and into July time. Obviously we're 1st of May today, so yes, it's a great sight to see at this time of year. But lavender is a really good plant. You can get other varieties such as the Hidcote, Munstead as well, which I use a lot. And I should say guys, in all of the gardens that I create around the UK, I plant all of these plants. So they are Wild Your Garden Joel Ashton approved, so they are tried and tested, I promise you. And these are obviously loved by a lot of bees. Mid-season lavender at the right time, when it's just absolutely at its zenith, it just looks perfect, and the bees just flock to it. I've seen I planted a bank up of these, a row of these in one garden I did in Hertfordshire that was featured on Gardener's World, which I'll put a link to at the end of this one. You can have a look at that, which was a row of about, I'd say 15 meters of lavender. And at the right time of year in June, it is just alive with bees. I stopped counting at about 500 bees. It's absolutely brilliant for them. So yes, lavenders in general are a very, very good source of nectar in particular for many, many insects, but butterflies as well, I should say. A lot of whites will use it, small tortoiseshell, peacock, brimstone, many, many species of butterfly will use lavender as a nectar source. So number 3 are these salvias. Now this is a Salvia carodonna, which is one of my absolute favourites, and it is just an absolute, well, massive purple when it comes into flower. Can you see the recurring theme here? Purple, obviously a very, very good colour for insects. It must be, because it is, all of the plants that I've chosen today are sort of a variation of purple, lilac, or sort of pinky purple. But yes, this Salvia carodonna is absolutely fabulous. It will grow to around about sort of 18 inches tall and has these lovely purple spires of flowers. Absolutely brilliant. Even a lot of the skippers will enjoy it as a nectar source, the butterflies, but bees in particular will really, really love this plant. Again, likes a nice, well-drained, sunny setting. So, and if you plant it in some blocks. So plant 3, 5, 7s, as with any planting scheme. If you can plant in odd numbers to create a block, it's far much more attractive for the wildlife that is likely to visit. But yes, number 3, Salvia carodonna, absolute must for any non-native herbaceous border. Now these last 2 are probably my joint favourite non-native herbaceous perennials. Now I should say as well, guys, I know I kind of touched on it at the beginning of the video, but non-native versus native, I think we can get a little bit caught up. And as I said earlier on, I think the best thing to do is, if it's in a non-garden setting, if it's in a wider landscape scale situation, you're looking to plant any of these plants, I'd always go for indigenous native species. I wouldn't go and put some of the plants I've just mentioned out in the middle of a field, just because they're not natural as in a setting. So there's far better plants that you can use for that situation. But yes, in a garden setting, these guys are absolutely brilliant for attracting wildlife. So let's move on to number 4, which is, I mean, look at that. Why wouldn't you want one of those in your garden? That is Erysimum Bowles Mauve, and as I say, this is probably joint favourite of mine because it is just brilliant. It's a short-lived perennial, and most of these are kind of short to mid term, if you like, in terms of a life frame or a lifespan. They should probably last for about 3 to 5 years, depending on the situation, depending on how much frost you get on an average winter, that sort of thing. But the Erysimum Bowles Mauve, I used to have a couple in this border behind me here, which were absolutely teeming with bees and butterflies for a large chunk of the year, because these things flower almost on and off all year. So that's why they're really good at providing a nectar source for early emerging bees, things like the hairy-footed flower bee, which I'm glad I mentioned, because just down there I've got some cowslips that I'll put a clip in of now, where I managed to film yesterday a female hairy-footed flower bee. Just the most delightful little sequence in slow motion, where she was visiting the flowers of the cowslip. She was grabbing on and then shoving her proboscis or tongue right into the centre of the flower, stuffing her face right in there, and then coming out with pollen all over her tongue, where she would wipe it off with her front legs, transfer it to the hairs and the pollen sacs on her hind legs, before she then would take that back to her nest cell, where I think they are in the front of the garden in the little insect hotel, and basically bung up a hole with a larvae in it with a source of pollen for them to eat when they emerge. Absolutely fabulous, and you wouldn't have known she was doing that unless you'd seen it in slow motion. I certainly didn't. It was just wonderful to see. So yes, the hairy-footed flower bees certainly love the Erysimums as well as cowslips. And I should say, guys, I will be doing another video on the channel of some of the best plants you can plant for a shady border, so stay tuned for that one. But Erysimum, really great. Again, it just keeps flowering, and again, if you cut it back, it will just produce more of these little mini flower heads. As you can see, that one's raring to go now, and it'll send up these spikes that you can then cut back and it'll just keep sending them up. It's absolutely brilliant, and it will just again trail well over the edge of a raised bed if you've got one like I've got here. And also guys, another video coming up soon, I'm going to be planting this border up with some it's kind of a semi-shady border, so I'm going to be planting it up with a lot of the plants like this, which I'll be bringing you in another video to come, to show you how I space my plants a bit more, and what kind of a feel you can get from a herbaceous border in your own garden, along with the herbaceous border that I'll be filming in the front garden. But Erysimum bowls mauve, I cannot sing its praises highly enough. It's absolutely fantastic. So many butterflies visit this. My favourite butterfly, the orange tip. We've got brimstones, and I should say as well guys, sorry, slight distraction, however today I've filmed the first female brimstone egg laying on the 3 older buckthorn that I've put in the front garden. Absolutely chuffed to bits. They've been in less than 2 months, and already there's female brimstones absolutely loving it, laying dozens and dozens of eggs over the space of half an hour I watched her do earlier. It was absolutely fantastic to see. And I've also got some eggs in the back garden on the common or purging buckthorn that I planted in the mini woodland border. Again, another video to come for you guys. So as you can probably guess, a lot more videos to come of the garden this year. So Erysimum bowls mauve anyway, get one of those in your garden. I've actually got about 5 or 6 to go in, so yes, plenty of those, hopefully to attract lots more wildlife. And last but by no means least, possibly my favourite, don't ask me to choose. But yes, joint favourite at least is this, the Verbena bonariensis, which is absolutely wonderful. You can see it, I'll put some pictures in obviously. I've banged on about this. I've done a whole video which I'll put a link to at the end of this one as well, which is just a fabulous plant, and I'll tell you why. Because it flowers from pretty much June non-stop right the way through till November, so as a source of nectar for insects it's absolutely second to none. I mean, I don't know of many herbaceous perennials apart from this little chap, the Erysimum that we've just spoken about, that will flower for that length of time. It really is incredible, the Verbena. And what I love about it is when it's finished flowering and you sort of leave it standing there as a bit of an architectural plant, I would always recommend you do so, because the seeds are loved by a lot of the finch species, so things such as goldfinches, which we get in our gardens, greenfinches, chaffinches, linnets if you're in a slightly more rural setting. So a lot of birds will actually eat the seeds of the Verbena bonariensis when it is when it's finished flowering basically. And I love it because you can plant it at the front of a border, middle of a border, back of a border, it doesn't matter where, because it's got these very, very thin stems. It's almost a single stem with just these almost horizontal branches that come off it, which or parts of the stem that come off it, which produce then these little lilac coloured flowers, like little pom-poms or mini clouds. They just look like little floating lilac clouds in a border. Absolutely love it, and it's visited by at least 17 species of butterfly that I've recorded in the UK. No doubt tons more in America as well. Well, I know in fact it is, because I've seen videos that other people have posted, and I just know it is loved by so many insects out there. It really is a fantastic plant. And with any of the plants like this, I think the flower shape has a lot to do with it. So the same as Buddleia, the Lantana Camara, which I've just today found 2 of in a garden centre, which I've seen in the States, I know is really good for skippers, and I'm going to be putting those in the front borders and hoping, fingers crossed, they survive if we get any frosts. But yes, I was absolutely chuffed to find the Lantana Camaras in the garden centre, so I've snapped up 2 of those today, more to come on those. But they are very, very similar shaped flower to the Verbena and the Buddleia, and I think this has a lot to do with the amount of insects it can attract to a garden. Speaking of goldfinches, greenfinches, that bzzz and that brrr, if you can hear it. Anyway, that's the greenfinch. So, and they've been coming back into the garden since the spring, which is really, really encouraging to see. Massive population crash over the last 15 years due to the I can't remember the name of it, I'll put a link in below the description, the disease that's been going around that's affected them, which is a consequence of not cleaning your feeders out. So clean your feeders out, guys. Yes, because it does spread this disease that is very, very horrible to see, really. Birds basically, their throat and their mouth swell up and they can't swallow, and they die of starvation. It's really not very pleasant. So yes, clean your feeders, but great to see them starting to bounce back in better numbers, and chaffinches in the garden as well over the last couple of months, so really good. But yes, back to the verbena, an absolutely vital plant for any herbaceous border. It does grow very tall, I should say that. It'll grow up to 4, 5, even 6 feet in very fertile soil, so a really nice bit of structure. So a great one for the back of a border. It'll come above most other plants, and it'll just sit there, just gently swaying with these purpley lilac clouds of profusion in the summertime. So a really good plant, and one that I wouldn't even consider planting a herbaceous border without. It's just absolutely brilliant. So those are my top 5 non-native herbaceous perennials. Obviously there are others out there. You might disagree, you might say, well, you should have had this, you should have had that, but for me this is just what I've personally experienced. So many insects visiting in my own garden, some of the projects that I create around the UK over the last 20 years. So they really are a fantastic source of food for many insects. And obviously we're talking about a nectar source here in these 5 plants, but obviously there are many plants that you can plant in your garden to attract a lot of native insects for as a larval species. So things that I've just mentioned about the older buckthorn for the brimstones and the common buckthorn, but also many plants as well, things like the garlic mustard, which I've got here in the garden, which I will be doing another video of shortly, which is the host plant for my favourite butterfly, the orange tip, of which I have seen 1 or 2 starting to appear in the garden now. So I'm hoping over the next couple of weeks numbers build and I can show you guys exactly why they are my favourite butterfly, and some of the eggs when they are laid, fingers crossed, I hope, on the garlic mustard. So I will be doing more videos on some of the larval food plants that you can include in your garden, which will obviously help those species. It's not just about getting them into nectar, it's about creating an entire ecosystem for them. So you want these insects to come in your garden and stay, to reproduce, to lay their eggs, and to live out their entire life cycle within your little garden. And my garden's not massive, and it certainly does do just that for many species, of which I will come on to. So well, I should say, when it comes to the maintenance, guys, I have done a video on when to prune your non-native herbaceous perennials. Perhaps I'll put that in as a link at the end over one of the other videos, but yes, I have done a video on that. In general, you know, you're better off cutting them back later on in the season to allow things like the verbena to go to seed, but yes, more on that in another video that I'll put a link to at the end of this one. So I hope today's video has really inspired you guys to go out there and get some of these plants in your garden, because they really are a plentiful supply of nectar and pollen for many insects, and they will definitely help attract some of them to your garden. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. As always, drop some comments in the box below. If you are new to the channel, let me know if you've subscribed for the first time, and obviously hit that subscribe button and that little notification bell. So many of you don't do that, and then you do miss, or you might miss videos, and I do post twice a week on a Wednesday, apart from this one, which, sorry it's late, guys, busy times at the moment, but yes, on a Sunday and a Wednesday at 6 PM BST or GMT. Yes, so stay tuned, guys, lots more to come, lots more that I'm filming you as the season progresses, and keep in touch and take care, and I'll see you all very soon.